That night, everything changed. My best friend's mom looked at me in a way I'll never forget. The evening started like any other. I had been invited over to my best friend's house for a casual hangout, homework, some snacks, maybe a movie. I never expected it to linger in my mind long after the night ended. Yet somehow it would. His mom, in her early 40s, moved through the space with an ease that was both graceful and commanding. She wasn't flashy or loud. Her presence was subtle, quiet, yet impossible to ignore. She laughed softly, her voice warm and reassuring, and there was a way she carried herself, poised, confident, and kind, that made the room feel instantly more grounded. From the moment I walked in, I found myself noticing small things I had never paid attention to before. The way her hair caught the soft glow of the overhead lights, the gentle curve of her smile, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the aroma of the evening meal. Nothing about her demanded attention, yet everything about her invited it. I couldn't explain the sudden pull I felt toward her. Something deeper than admiration, tinged with curiosity and, if I was honest, a flutter of nervous excitement. The night was ordinary on the surface. My friend was preoccupied with video games, sprawled across the living room couch, and I tried to focus on him, on the easy conversation we always had. But every time she passed by, offering me a drink or a quick question about my day, I found myself acutely aware of her presence. She handed me a glass of juice, and our fingers brushed for a brief second, just enough to send a small, surprising spark through me. I quickly pulled back, telling myself I was imagining it, but the warmth lingered. There was something in the way she looked at me, too. Not a look of judgment or curiosity, exactly, but something softer, something that seemed to recognize me in a way no one else had. Her eyes held a quiet understanding, an almost imperceptible amusement that made me feel both seen and a little unsteady. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense, not yet, but it carried an energy I couldn't name, a tension hovering in the air without ever being spoken. I remember sitting at the kitchen counter later, feeling the evening settle into a comfortable rhythm. She moved around, clearing plates, humming softly to herself, and I caught myself glancing at her more than once. There was a subtle elegance to her movements, a rhythm that suggested experience and confidence, tempered with warmth. I could sense her awareness too. Every once in a while, she would look my way, just for a moment longer than necessary, and I would feel a strange mixture of excitement and guilt. That was the night everything quietly shifted. Nothing dramatic happened, no words, no confessions, but the seed was planted. Something unspoken passed between us in those fleeting touches, lingering glances, and shared silences. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. From that moment, I began seeing her differently, noticing details I had overlooked before, feeling a pull that I wasn't ready to define. The ordinary evening had transformed into something charged with possibility, setting the stage for a connection that would change everything in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. The night unfolded in ordinary rhythms, yet something was different, almost imperceptible, in the air. My friend had retreated to his room, lost in a game or some late-night homework, leaving the house quieter than usual. She moved about the living room, stacking dishes, folding a blanket, humming a soft tune under her breath. I had always noticed her before, of course, but tonight, it was like I could see her in a completely new light, every small movement magnified by an intensity one hadn't expected. It started with something minor, almost accidental. She handed me a dish towel as I offered to help clear the table. Our hands brushed, brief, fleeting, and I felt a warmth shoot through me, sharp and electric. My first instinct was to pull back, embarrassed by the intensity of the sensation, but I couldn't quite let go of that lingering heat. Her eyes met mine for just a second longer than necessary, and in that instant, there was a subtle shift, a silent acknowledgement that neither of us voiced but that hung in the space between us. We ended up sitting together on the couch, ostensibly for a casual conversation while I helped her sort a few small things. She laughed softly at something I said, a gentle, melodic sound that wrapped around me in a way I hadn't realized I craved. It wasn't flirtation in a bold sense. It was quieter, more nuanced, a play of attention and warmth that made my heart race without any overt signal. I became acutely aware of the way she moved, the grace in her posture, the light brush of her arm against mine as she reached for something across the couch. Every small gesture felt charged, a silent communication neither of us fully acknowledged. I remember glancing at her face, noticing the way the dim lamplight highlighted the soft contours of her cheeks and the subtle curve of her lips. Her expression held an unreadable quality, kindness mixed with a flicker of something deeper, something that suggested she was aware of the change taking place between us. The sensation was almost dizzying, this quiet pull, this magnetic tension that made ordinary gestures feel heavy with meaning. And yet, we said nothing. Words weren't necessary, not yet. The silence itself carried weight, a shared awareness that left me both exhilarated and nervous. My thoughts raced. Was this real? Was I imagining it? Could someone like her, someone so poised, so self-assured, really notice me in this way? And the most dangerous thought of all, I found myself hoping she did. That night, nothing bold happened. No confessions, no dramatic turns. But something fundamental shifted. The ordinary had become extraordinary simply because of the way we interacted, the way moments lingered longer than they should, the way touch, glances, and silences carried more meaning than either of us admitted. It was the start of a tension that would thread through every encounter afterward, subtle but impossible to ignore. By the time I left her house that night, I was aware of the change, of the fragile yet undeniable connection that had begun to take shape. I walked home replaying every glance, every accidental touch, every moment our eyes met and lingered. That night wasn't dramatic, but it planted a seed. One that would grow quietly, insistently, shaping the way I would see her from that point on. The ordinary evening had quietly transformed into something charged, something unspoken, something I could neither define nor resist. The next day, I found myself seeing her differently, though nothing had changed in our routine. My friend was still preoccupied with his own world, and yet the way his mom moved around the house seemed almost magnetic. It was as though the night before had left a residue of tension, quiet but undeniable, lingering in the air. Every glance, every small gesture between us carried a weight I hadn't felt before, a weight that made ordinary moments feel suddenly charged. We found ourselves in the kitchen together while my friend rummaged through his drawers upstairs. She leaned slightly against the counter, arms folded loosely, a smile playing on her lips as she observed my fumbling attempt to pour a cup of tea. "You're getting better at this," she said, her voice gentle, tinged with amusement. The words were casual, yet the way she looked at me, her eyes holding mine for a beat longer than necessary, made my chest tighten unexpectedly. I wanted to look away, to act normal, but I couldn't. The recognition in her gaze was like a spark, small but undeniable. We shared a quiet moment, standing side by side, the air between us dense with unspoken understanding. It was subtle, nothing overt, but the energy was there. I noticed the slight tilt of her head, the soft shift in posture when she leaned closer to reach for a utensil, the brief brush of her arm against mine as she handed me a spoon. Each gesture, mundane in its surface, felt intimate under the weight of our awareness. I became acutely conscious of how she seemed to mirror me in little ways. The way she laughed when I laughed, the subtle softening of her eyes when I spoke, the gentle tilts and shifts in stance that suggested she was aware of how close we were. It was unspoken, delicate, but it existed. I wondered if she felt it too. The same curious, fluttering tension that made my heart race and my thoughts scatter. There were moments when I caught her watching me, almost by accident, or so I told myself. The flicker of a smile that lingered too long, the way she straightened when she noticed my eyes on her, the way her hand hovered near mine before she remembered herself. These small, fleeting gestures created a new language between us, one without words but full of meaning. I also noticed the way my own body responded, how my shoulders tensed, how my hands itched to reach for her, how my gaze kept returning to her even when I tried to focus elsewhere. It was thrilling and terrifying at the same time, this silent acknowledgement of attraction that neither of us dared speak aloud. There was a tension in the air, a quiet push and pull, a recognition of something that couldn't be ignored but couldn't yet be named. By the end of the day, I was left with the certainty that nothing would ever feel quite the same again. Ordinary interactions, pouring tea, folding laundry, moving around the kitchen, were charged with a subtle intensity, a quiet awareness that had crept into every glance and gesture. Unspoken recognition had taken root between us, delicate but persistent, signaling the start of something complicated, alluring, and impossible to ignore. The night before had been the spark. Today, it had become a current running beneath every moment we shared. A week had passed since that night, yet the tension between us had only grown, subtle but undeniable. We found ourselves alone one evening, the house quieter than usual. My friend had gone out with some friends, leaving me in the living room with her, ostensibly to help with a few chores, but in reality, it felt like fate had given us a private bubble, a space suspended from the ordinary rhythms of life. She moved with her usual elegance, stacking books and clearing a small corner of the room, and I watched, drawn to her presence in a way I could no longer ignore. There was something vulnerable in her gestures, a softness beneath the composed exterior she wore for the world. It made her human, approachable, and dangerously magnetic all at once. I felt a mix of admiration and nervous excitement as I tried to focus on helping her, yet found my attention constantly pulled back to her. Her hands, her smile, the gentle tilt of her head as she glanced my way. We paused near the sofa when she reached for a pillow. Our hands brushed, this time not accidental, as if the universe was conspiring to remind me of her nearness. My heart raced, and I could feel warmth rising in my chest. I wanted to speak, to acknowledge the strange electricity that had taken root between us, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, we stood there, sharing that quiet, lingering contact, aware of each other in a way that made ordinary moments feel heavy with possibility. Then she spoke softly, almost hesitantly. "You've seemed different lately," she said, her voice careful yet curious. I looked at her, sensing the weight behind her words. There was no accusation, only observation, and it struck me how deeply she noticed even the smallest shifts in me. I felt exposed, nervous, yet comforted by the trust inherent in her attention. Her eyes softened as she continued, and without thinking, I reached for her hand, placing it lightly over hers. The touch was gentle, tentative, a confirmation rather than a question. She didn't pull away. Instead, she lingered there, letting the contact speak for us both. It was a conversation without words, a confession of sorts. Not of love, not yet, but of understanding, acknowledgement, and quiet desire. We stayed like that for a few moments, letting silence fill the space. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the warmth of her hand against mine, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the comfort of home. It was a moment suspended in time, intimate yet entirely safe, where vulnerability and trust intertwined. When we finally moved apart, it was with a sense of calm inevitability. The tension hadn't dissolved. It had deepened, but now it carried a gentleness, a mutual recognition of emotions neither of us dared fully name. I realized that this was more than attraction. It was connection, built on small gestures, shared spaces, and the courage to simply exist near each other without pretense. That night marked a turning point. We didn't cross boundaries, but the emotional intimacy we shared had shifted something fundamental. It was no longer just fascination or curiosity. It was understanding, empathy, and the first quiet acknowledgement that what we felt might be more than fleeting. The ordinary evening had given way to emotional motion, a current that pulled us closer even as we remained cautious, aware of the delicate line we were treading. It was one of those quiet evenings where the house seemed suspended in its own world. My friend had gone out, leaving me with her once again, but this time the atmosphere felt different. Charged, almost electric. Nothing dramatic had happened to signal it, yet every movement, every glance, every small gesture between us carried weight. The night air, slightly cool through the open window, seemed to heighten every sensation, every heartbeat. We found ourselves in the living room, working on small tasks. A stack of papers to organize, a few dishes to wash, but it was impossible to ignore the silent rhythm that had developed between us over the past days. Every time our hands brushed, it lingered fractionally longer than necessary, and every time our eyes met, there was a pause, a hesitation, as if both of us were aware of something forbidden yet intoxicating. At one point, she reached across the table to grab a pen, and our fingers touched again. I felt a jolt of awareness shoot through me, sudden and undeniable, and I caught myself holding her gaze longer than I should. Her eyes softened, the corners of her mouth lifting just slightly, and for a moment, it felt as though the world had condensed into that one instant. The air between us felt thick, each breath shared, each subtle movement amplified. There was a strange push and pull in the way we moved. I wanted to close the distance, to bridge the gap between curiosity and desire, but I was tethered by hesitation, by social boundaries, by the unspoken rules of propriety. She, too, seemed caught between restraint and impulse. I noticed the faint tension in her shoulders, the way her hand lingered near mine, the subtle shift of her body as if leaning slightly closer while still maintaining a careful distance. Every motion spoke volumes without words. We paused for a moment, standing across from each other, the silence heavy and intimate. She spoke softly, almost a whisper, commenting on something trivial. A misplaced book, the dim light, but the tone carried layers I couldn't ignore. It was light, casual, yet underneath it, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the pull between us. I found myself wanting to say something, anything, but all I could do was meet her gaze and allow the moment to stretch. The world outside the window, the quiet street, the flickering street lamp, the faint rustle of leaves, seemed to fade into insignificance. All that existed was her warmth, the way she smelled faintly of jasmine, the way her eyes held mine with a mix of curiosity and quiet daring. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened, and I realized that the attraction I had been trying to deny was now undeniable, simmering in every unspoken glance, every subtle touch, every shared silence. Eventually, we moved apart, but the tension didn't dissipate. It lingered like a low hum, an unbroken thread connecting us. That night marked the emotional peak of our slow-burning connection, a moment where desire and propriety collided, leaving us both aware of the dangerous intensity simmering beneath the surface. Nothing explicit had happened, yet everything had changed. Every glance, every gesture, every heartbeat from that point forward would carry the weight of this night, and I knew that nothing between us would ever feel ordinary again. The days after that charged evening felt different, quieter yet heavier with unspoken understanding. Each time I saw her, the tension lingered, like an undercurrent threading through the ordinary rhythms of our interactions. By now, it was impossible to ignore the depth of the connection that had quietly taken root between us. Every glance, every subtle smile, carried weight. Every accidental brush of hands seemed loaded with intention, yet nothing explicit had passed between us. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the living room in golden light, we found ourselves alone again. I was helping her organize a few books she had brought down from the shelf, and our hands met repeatedly as we passed items back and forth. This time, the contact was less accidental and more conscious, a mutual acknowledgement of the closeness that had developed. I felt warmth rising in my chest, tempered by a nervous awareness of the boundaries we had to respect. She paused, resting a hand briefly on my shoulder, her eyes soft and attentive. "You've grown quieter these past few days," she said gently, almost teasing, but there was a tenderness beneath her words. I looked at her, searching her face, trying to gauge how much she felt and how much she dared to show. The vulnerability I saw in her eyes, the tiny hesitations, the subtle softness, mirrored my own. For the first time, I realized she was aware of the same pull I felt, the same curiosity and longing, and yet, she didn't rush me or force the moment. I spoke, voice low, careful. I think I've noticed things I didn't before. About you, about us." Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile, and she tilted her head ever so slightly, encouraging me to continue without words pressuring me. The atmosphere was intimate but safe, suspended in the gentle glow of the evening light. She placed her hand lightly over mine, a gesture of reassurance and understanding. It wasn't romantic in a conventional sense, not yet, but it was connection, acknowledgement, and trust. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the gentle pressure of her hand, and I realized that intimacy could exist without overt action, that emotional closeness could be as powerful as anything physical. We sat together in silence for a few moments, letting the quiet fill the space. I felt my heart slow, my mind clear, as though the tension had found release not through words or gestures of romance, but through honesty and shared awareness. There was no rush, no pressure, just recognition of what existed between us and the understanding that it mattered. By the time I left that evening, I felt a sense of calm resolve. The attraction, the tension, the curiosity, they were all acknowledged, accepted, and contained within a safe, mutual understanding. The emotional peak of our connection had been met with respect, patience, and awareness. That night marked a turning point. We could exist together in shared spaces, bound by something quietly powerful, without needing to cross boundaries or rush into something neither of us was ready for. It was a resolution, but not an ending. It was a promise of awareness, of emotional honesty, and of a connection that would shape every moment we shared from that point onward. The unspoken bond between us had found clarity, and I knew that the moments yet to come would be built on this foundation of trust, curiosity, and quiet, simmering emotion. The evening had settled into a quiet, almost magical calm. My friend was out, the house cloaked in soft lamplight, shadows stretching gently across the walls. After weeks of subtle tension, unspoken glances, and fleeting touches, the energy between us had shifted into something deeper, a quiet understanding that was both thrilling and terrifying. We were alone together again, and though nothing overtly romantic would happen tonight, the air felt heavy with meaning. We found ourselves in the living room, arranging the last few items from a small stack of books she had been sorting. Our hands met briefly as we passed a book between us, lingering for just a second longer than necessary. The warmth of her hand, the softness of her touch, sent a familiar flutter through me, a gentle echo of the intensity we had shared in previous moments. I noticed the subtle smile on her lips, the slight tilt of her head, the way her eyes held mine with a calm awareness that made everything else fade away. For a long moment we simply stood there, not speaking, allowing the silence to carry our thoughts, our emotions, and the connection we had built over the past days. There was no need to force words. The understanding between us had grown stronger than any conversation could express. I felt a mix of longing and comfort, a recognition that this bond, quiet, intense, and profoundly human, was something rare and precious. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I'm glad you're here tonight," she said. It was simple, yet the weight behind it was unmistakable. I nodded, finding my own voice. "Me too. I don't want things to be awkward between us." She smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips, and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. The touch was grounding, reassuring, and intimate without overstepping. We shared a brief, lingering hug, a gesture of connection that conveyed everything words couldn't. Her warmth enveloped me, and for a moment, it felt as though the world outside the room had ceased to exist. The closeness wasn't physical in a romantic sense, but it carried a weight far more meaningful. Trust, acknowledgement, and the quiet thrill of a connection that had grown slowly, carefully, and intentionally. When we finally pulled apart, there was a shared glance that said everything. We both understood the delicate line we had navigated and the bond that had formed in its wake. There was no rush, no pressure, no need for immediate decisions. Only awareness, appreciation, and the knowledge that the moments we had shared would linger in our hearts long after that night. As I left the house, stepping into the cool evening air, I replayed our interactions in my mind. The gentle touches, the fleeting glances, the soft laughter, the quiet honesty. The tension had resolved, not with grand declarations, but with subtle affirmation, emotional depth, and mutual respect. I knew that our connection, however complicated or undefined, had changed me. She had too. And though the future was uncertain, I carried a sense of peace, knowing that some bonds are powerful simply because they exist, quietly and profoundly, in the spaces between words and gestures. That night ended not with drama, but with a lasting impact. A shared understanding that would shape every interaction to come, a slow-burn connection neither of us would forget, and a subtle, beautiful acknowledgement that life, emotion, and desire often intertwine in the quietest, most transformative ways. If this slow-burn story moved you, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a connection that changed everything in a single night? I'd love to hear your story.